Now I'd like to introduce these gentlemen to you who will be participating in the pre-launch briefing this afternoon. From your right, we have Colonel Kenneth J. Mask, United States Air Force, who is Director of Department of Defense Manned Space Flight Support, located at Patrick Air Force Base. Mr. Rosroe Covington, Assistant Director for Manned Flight Support at the Goddard Space Flight Center. Dr. Charles Berry, Director of Medical Research and Operations at the NASA Manned Spacecraft Center. Donald K. Slayton, Director of Flight Crew Operations, Manned Spacecraft Center. Captain Chester Lee, who is the Apollo Mission Director. Dr. Rocco Petrone, Apollo Program Director. And next we have Mr. Walter Kavrian, who is Director of Launch Operations here at the NASA Kennedy Space Center. Colonel Jim McDivitt, who is Apollo Program Manager at the Manned Spacecraft Center. And finally, Dick Smith, who is the Saturn V Program Manager at the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. Dr. Petrone?
Thank you, Jack. In the 10 months since our Apollo 13 mission, the Apollo team has been going through an intensive review of our systems and our procedures, carrying out the modifications we decided to carry out after the 13 accident. It's been an intensive 10 months. It's been a very busy 10 months, a very comprehensive 10 months. We've carried out all the things we started to do as a result of our review of Apollo 13. I'm sure most of you, or probably all of you, are familiar to various briefings we've had with the steps we've taken. Basically on the ship itself, some additional features we have modified. We've carried the program now to the point that we're satisfied. We've made the necessary corrections that the Apollo 13 mission brought forth, and now we're ready to fly. We've carried out all our testing. We've done all the preparations here at KSC, and all things that bring us up to this point after this very intensive effort of 10 months that we're now ready to proceed with our next flight to the moon. And for the particulars on the mission for tomorrow, I'd like to ask Chet Lee to give you a few words.
Well, as most of you know, I'm sure that count is proceeding well. We are making the final preparations to close out the mobile service structure to move it back. The mobile service structure should move away sometime shortly after 6 p.m. tonight. We will go into a planned hold at 8 p.m. this evening. The hold and the final count will begin at 5:23 a.m. for the propellant loading of the launch vehicle. The crew is ready. All the DoD forces have been deployed and are standing by on station in their assigned areas. The Manned Flight Space Network is making final checks and calibrations and is ready. Perhaps the only thing right now on the horizon is the possibility of some weather tomorrow in the launch area. There's a front that is lying now currently up near Tennessee that could move across the state of Florida. It could be north, it could pass through, it could be right here. However, there's not supposed to be too much weather associated with this front. But also in the Gulf are some thunderstorms building up that are moving to the east, and they could possibly pass through sometime early in the afternoon. They're widely scattered. It could end up that we have bright, clear skies. Could end up that Cappy will have some problems worrying about thunderstorms. In the recovery areas in the Atlantic, we do have some rough seas, but Department of Defense recovery forces report that they are go and the recovery conditions are okay at this time. We'll have to watch this, of course, in real time.
Thank you, Chet. Before proceeding with the questions, I would like to announce, I neglected it here in the initial introductions, that Sig Schoberg, who is Director of Flight Operations, and Pete Frank, the Flight Director, are standing by participating in this conference at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. Okay, we're now ready for questions from here at the Cape. Just stand by for the microphone, if you would, please, and we'd like you to identify yourself also.
I have two questions. First of all, I'd like, Mr. Lee, could you tell us, or anybody else would like to comment, what Apollo 14 mission means to the manned space flight program in terms of a successful mission? And secondly, for Cappy or whoever else, if we do get thunderstorms, what do you plan to do? Will you have planes and that kind of thing for lightning checks?
Well, with regard to your first question, I think I speak for myself, and I think I represent the opinion of a lot of others. We feel the Apollo 14 mission is very, very important. Would you like to add anything, Rocco, to that?
Well, I'd have to say, Mary, they're all important. No question, it's always been true in our mind, every Apollo. I really, in terms of the mission, I've said many times, each bird that flies out of here flies on its own. Each one has a very important role to play. 13 had an important role. We didn't achieve it. 14 now is going after that role. We have plans, as you know, for 15, 16. I personally don't put, might say, more weight on one than another because we strive for the most out of each of them. It may sound just commonplace to you, but it's not like we're playing a playoff game for the Super Bowl or anything of that nature. We've got a program ahead of us. This is one of 4 missions we do plan to make to the moon and the remainder of the Apollo.
Kathy, would you like to comment on the second part of the question?
Yes, of course. We do have plans underway as far as monitoring the weather is concerned. I would like to add that we would be doing this whether there was any concern over a front coming in or not. Aircraft will be airborne with instrumentation to measure potential gradients. Visual observations, of course, will be made, and that information will be fed to me at the firing room. The mission rules we have with respect to the weather are identically the same as they were for Apollo 13. We will not launch within 5 statute miles of a thunderstorm, nor within 3 miles of its associated anvil. We will not launch through a cold front or a squall line, series of clouds. We will not launch through middle cloud layers over 6,000 feet or greater in depth where the freeze level is in the clouds. And we will not launch through cumulus clouds with tops at 10,000 feet or higher. These rules will be very strictly adhered to, and I assure you we will not be launching if there's any question.
Thank you, Cappy. After that fine first question concerned with Apollo 14, I would like to remind you all that that's the subject of the conference, and we would like to restrict the questions to Apollo 14 as we continue. Sanders?
2 questions. One of them kind of a follow-up to you, Cappy. Are there any plans or is any provision made for this, what do you call that, Mickey Mouse, Mighty Mouse, the small rockets to trigger lightning? Are they available if you need them? And for Deke, would you give us a rundown on the crew today and what it looks like for tomorrow, if there are any deviations from the flight plan press kit schedule that we have?
With respect to the Mighty Mouse question, that of course is a research program that has been instituted recently and is still in its very preliminary stages. We have not progressed very far with that, and we have no plans at the present time to implement anything of this sort.
Well, for the second part, the crew today, this morning, Al and Ed ran on the LMS to get a few normal landings for a change. They haven't seen many of those. Been bombing them with a few problems. And Stu went out and flew. This afternoon, they're just going to relax and probably review flight plans, visit with some friends. Starting tomorrow, I don't know what the press gets says, so I'll tell you what my schedule says. Wake them up at 10:08, we hope. If they're up before that, well, we'll probably do a few things, but plan is to get up at 10:08, do the normal physical exam, breakfast or lunch, depending upon your point of view, is 10:53, suit room 1128, and we depart there at, let's see, about 12:17. Arrive at the pad at 12:35.
Ask Dr. Berry about the physical condition of the astronauts and what he thinks now of the quarantine procedures that you used.
Well, the physical condition of the crew is excellent. We haven't had any changes since the last exam. There have been daily checks, and everything is going along very, very well. We're really happy with the situation that we're in right now. As far as the quarantine, I prefer we don't use that word quarantine because that's not really what it is. It's if it were a quarantine, it would be like the post-flight situation that we have where you have an absolute total isolation thing. We don't have that here, so it isn't really a quarantine in that sense. But the program that has been carried out and has been labeled a Flight Crew Health Stabilization Program, I think has done apparently a very good job thus far. We haven't had any illness. Now, I think that it's early to judge that sort of thing and say that that's necessarily an effect of the program, though. And I think we ought to be very clear that just because we have one mission that goes and you don't have an illness, or vice versa, should you have an illness, I don't think that either of those could be laid particularly on the program. We have to understand that what you're doing is trying to cut to the lowest amount possible the chances of having an illness. You cannot eliminate it. I think that things have gone extremely well with this program. The cooperation has been absolutely fantastic on everyone's part, both the crews, the primary contacts, and all the people that just have to be aware of it and try and help. And it's really been a tremendous effort on everyone's part.
Thank you. Bear with us. Because of these lights up here, it's very hard to see beyond about the first 10 rows, but we'll try to recognize people as well as we can. In fact, I don't see any more hands right now. Shouldn't have said that. Go ahead, Louis.
Dr. Piconi, have you ever seen a countdown as flawless as for Apollo 14? And I want to ask Dr. Berry if he has seen the health of the three astronauts as good, as excellent as is the case this time.
I think the countdown for 14 has progressed very well. And when you say how you compare it with others, I think we set the times and all, so we might say allow to make up for small problems that might come along. I personally think that 14 has gone well. I know we've had others. Let me ask Cap, since he's in the middle of the pot on this one, just how he feels 14 would compare, say, with the last few we had.
Well, I think that they've been roughly comparable. I think on Apollo 13 we did have some concern, as you all know, for the supercritical helium tank in the lunar module. We haven't, at this point in time, had that concern. As you all probably know, when we did run the countdown demonstration test, we did run into several problems, one of which was with the propellant utilization system for the S4B stage. We had some difficulties with LOX flow meters and with the LOX replenish valve. That's all been corrected, and as a result, the count has progressed very smoothly.
As far as the physical condition, that's, again, those are hard things to compare. We have had certainly crews that have gone through the pre-mission time without any illnesses or anything. As you know, the early part of the Apollo, we had troubles with that, but certainly with 10 and 11 and 12 with at the time of launch, I think we had crews that were in as good a condition as this.
Jack Markowitz, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Is there any chance that Apollo 14 launching could be stopped by a demonstration or protest group? And secondly, what might the panelists have to say about the desirability of this as a target for a demonstration? Is this the sort of thing that ought to be demonstrated again?
What particular demonstration are you referring to, sir? I know that there's at least one apparent one, but I think you should identify it, perhaps, and we'll see what happens from there.
Well, if there's more than one, I'd be glad to hear about it. But I'm speaking of the so-called Poor People's March from somewhere north of here.
Let me take a crack at that. We're aware of the possibility of demonstrations, and preparations have been made as once before, as I recall. I've forgotten. Apollo 11, we had one. It was handled in an outstanding manner. We all feel, with the preparations been made, we don't feel that it's going to impact the launch, and it will launch on time, providing weather and everything else works out as we hope it will do. As far as what the impact of demonstrations, I guess I can only say that the money doesn't go on the moon. The money involved in this is for our country and is doing good for our country. And we feel we should continue with the launching.
Stay a hand way back up by the camera there.
Reed Collins of CBS News. For Mr. Caprian, about this weather issue again with respect to your, say, your propellant loading, could you discuss any contingent or anticipatory plan you might have to call a hold for weather to pass through, what the constraints are for working on the stack?
We would progress with the propellant loading. The only kind of occurrence that would cause us to hold would be should something of the nature of lightning strike the near vicinity of the pad. Well, then of course we would have to, depending on the exact circumstance, secure the operation. I would like to point out that nothing of that nature is anticipated for tomorrow.
Back down here, Mr. Lamont.
For Colonel Mask or Cappy, you say there are about 10-foot seas in part of the Atlantic recovery area. I wonder if there's a mission rule that says how much you can stand, or winds a factor in that?
Let me take that, please. Our rules are that the recovery commander on the scene makes a decision whether he can make the recovery or not. It really doesn't. It could be 10-foot seas, it could be 12-foot seas. If your period between the seas were such that he could make the recovery, it could vary. So it's specifically if he feels, the man on the scene, the commander on the scene feels that he can make a recovery, he gives the go.
Reggie?
Reg Darnell, BBC. Is it still the position that only the commander can abort the mission during the actual launch by punching the button inside the CSM?
Yes.
That's right. The actual abort of propelling the spacecraft off of the booster is really controlled from a manual standpoint by the commander of the spacecraft. There are some other automatic sensors that sense over rates and things like that, which trigger the automatic sequences, but the manual input is made by the commander of the spacecraft. There are other abort signals that can be sent from the ground, but they just light an abort light for the pilot.
This is a question for Dick. I wonder if, since Captain Shepard has been a national hero for so long, an astronaut for a long period of time, I wonder if you could report any of the conversations you might have had with him in the last couple of days in which he might have recalled his famous ride on Freedom 7 and pondered on it and said anything about this flight coming up tomorrow.
No, I haven't had any discussions with him about Freedom 7. We've been concentrating on Apollo 14. And haven't discussed that subject at all up to this point.
Are you going to be able to give President Nixon a show down at St. John's? Will he be able to see this at all?
The question is, I guess, the question is, the President is expected to be in the Virgin Islands, according to Mr. Hoagland. Will he be able to see anything if he steps outside? I
really don't know.
You see, that's something not under our minds on the preparation of 14. We'll go anyway. We want
After about a month of research, I've been trying to find comparative costs here for the first Freedom 7 flight. Would any of you in your memory have any idea whatsoever what it cost?
I'm afraid we can all plead not guilty.
Alfonso Chardy, the News, Mexico City. Did the crash of that lunar landing trainer affect the mission?
Negative, it did not. There's only one component in that vehicle that's comparable to the LEM itself, and that's the hand controller. And the hand controller was not a factor in this particular accident.
We'll go to Houston for questions following this question here. Go ahead, sir.
John Stackhouse, Australian Financial Review. Would somebody in the panel indicate whether any critical periods in the early sector of the flight will be governed through your Canberra or Carnarvon controls?
May I suggest that Sig Schoberg in Houston or Pete Frank, who that might possibly answer that. I'm sure that they're involved with lunar injection, but why doesn't Pete answer that one?
The Carnarvon station, well, during the first revolution, be in contact with the spacecraft, and also for the translunar injection burn, we will see about 2 minutes of the burn from Carnarvon, and also some of the pre-ignition sequence of the S4 before that burn.
Okay, we'll now switch to Houston for questions, please.
Okay, this is Houston. Do we have any questions here? This gentleman here. Would you wait? Could you stand by for the mic, please?
Austrian Radio and TV. Could you please tell us the exact moment when mission control is switched from Cape Kennedy to Houston?
The launch operations manager, Paul Darnley, is watching the vehicle lift off, and as it clears tower, as the base clears the tower, he passes the word clear tower, and at that moment, Houston Mission Control Center takes control. Pause for a second because they have to